Hey everyone, welcome to Cube Reviews episode 24. This is your host, Ian Braverman. As per usual, I hope you're having a great day. Today I am joined by Micah Rahardjo. We had you on a previous episode, the Popper Cube, as episode 4. So everyone go check that episode out if you haven't heard it. How's it going today, Micah?
I'm doing well. It's a Monday, so start of the work week. Work from home on Mondays and Fridays, so next 3 days will be in the office, which I don't like waking up early in the morning, but it is what it is. So had a good day overall. How about yourself?
I totally get it. Today was a busy day for me. I have a interview tomorrow. I work for like a contractor, so I have to interview for one of their clients, and I'm always a little nervous for an interview. So today was a little stressful, but it'll be fine.
I find when I have those sorts of like stressful things that I know are coming later in the week, I always feel so relieved for the rest of the week. So it's good that you have it on a Tuesday and not a Friday, because I
Oh
know
yeah,
exactly what you mean with that.
the rest of the day I'm gonna be chilling.
That's good.
And yeah, introduce yourself. You were on a previous episode. Everyone go check that out, but tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe something we don't know about you.
Sure, yeah. I don't want to go too deep into my history with Magic just because I know I already talked about it in a previous episode, but been a Magic player now for about 13 years, been playing Cube for almost that long, and pretty much it's been my favorite way to play Magic since I started doing that. I guess another one of my hobbies that I probably didn't mention last time is I'm very big into JRPGs, so Japanese role-playing games. Play a lot of those.
What's your favorite ones?
Probably my favorite one is Final Fantasy Tactics, which I think is maybe kind of a basic answer, but I don't know. Who knows? I don't really know where people stand on that one. So
So are you very excited for the new Final Fantasy set?
I am extremely excited for the new Final Fantasy set. I know that a lot of people have a lot of conflicting ideas about Universes Beyond, just generally. And I think definitely depending on the IP, there's ones that I don't care so much and I don't really read the spoilers for, but I will be tuning in for pretty much anything that is related to Final Fantasy. So yeah.
I know that universes beyond are contentious, but I'm excited for like SpongeBob and Spider-Man. I don't know, what can I say? I'm
Agreed.
into
Yeah,
them.
no, I just want to see cool new Magic cards. I don't really care what or who is on them.
Yes, exactly. And I say it every week, but Micah is a regular at our weekly Q meetup, Games IRL, Avon, Connecticut. So if you happen to be in the area, come check us out. And today we're talking about a really unique cube that I've had the chance to play once now, and I really wanted to play again soon, the roguelike cube. Tell us about this cube.
Yeah, so there's probably a lot to unpack with this one. So I know you're talking about it just beforehand, but really, like, kind of my main impetus with wanting to create this cube was one of my favorite computer games to play in the past 7, 8 years is Slay the Spire. So for those who aren't familiar with the game, it's a roguelike deck builder game that you play. Some small indie group of people made it and kind of blew up. There's a lot of like copycat games, variants around it. Essentially, the idea is you have a starting deck, and then you go through different floors, fighting different encounters, going to shops, fighting bosses, all these sorts of things. As you like go through it, you add more cards to your deck, which is typically something you want to do because your starting deck is like not very good. So with this cube, I kind of wanted to recreate the experience of the encounters that you have within Slay the Spire. So I know that we'll kind of get into the specifics of that in a little bit, but the same general idea. You have a starting deck where the starting cards are not particularly amazing. You draft cards. As the draft event goes on, your decks will get stronger and you'll be playing kind of more interesting games. So the first few games can be a little bit more boring just because there are more focused around the starting cards. But yeah, that's kind of the general idea of it.
Yeah, and from reading about it online, I personally have not played Slay the Spire, but everyone keeps telling me I need to. But from reading your Cube Cobra and everything, you start with a basic deck. Over time, you add new cards to it. So this cube is unique because there is no draft portion before. This is not a cube where you're sitting down at a table with 8 people and getting 3 packs of 15 and drafting. Instead, this is a cube where everyone has a starting deck, like we just said, and then over time, more cards are added to your deck, which I would say, draft. We'll get more into that soon. But I don't know much about Slay the Spire, but so I read it about it online. So You start with a basic deck, you add new cards to it. There's turn-based combat. So kind of like in Magic, having multiple rounds of the draft or taking turns in a game. And there are relics in Slay the Spire also, which are permanent bonuses you can receive that kind of help you over time, which I would say are analogous to emblems. And the game is procedurally generated, which is kind of hard to replicate. But every round you play against a different opponent, their deck is also updating over time in ways that you can't see because you can't see the cards that they draft. So I guess that's kind of similar in many ways.
Yeah, no, I do. I kind of want to go into some further things there too, just because I know we're kind of getting more into the details of about how it works now. So just to get a little bit more specific, so I know I said a few times the starting deck is not particularly amazing. So each player is given a 12 card starting deck that has three copies of three different creatures. So those creatures are Mons Goblin Raiders, Merfolk the Pearl Trident, and Willow Elf, which are all 1 mana 1/1s with no Oracle text. They're all vanilla creatures for goblins, merfolk, and elves, respectively. So, as kind of foreshadowing, there is kindred themes for each of those groups. And then also the decks have one copy of three different removal spells. So there's Spark Jolt, Voltage Surge, and Strangle. And so Spark Jolt is a 1 mana red instant, deals 1 damage to any target, scries 1. Voltage Surge is kind of a long one to read, but it's a 1 mana instant that deals 2 damage to a creature, and you can sacrifice an artifact to have it instead deal 4. And then Strangle is a 1 mana sorcery that deals 3 damage to a creature. I guess it includes Planeswalker, but that's not relevant for the cube here because I don't include Planeswalkers in here. So yeah, that's what is considered as your starting deck. You had mentioned the concept of relics, which are like permanent bonuses. So that's another aspect of this cube that's like kind of unique compared to other things. There's also a phase where players get to draft emblems. So these aren't like the emblems that you see. Well, I mean, they are emblems like you see from Planeswalker Ultimates, but they're custom ones. So I did not like pull the Jace Vryn's Prodigy emblem that you cast a spell and your opponent mills 5 or whatever. It's all things that I kind of made uniquely that are specific to kind of how the game works. Sometimes they can be just as simple as adding certain cards to your deck, which kind of, as we'll discuss, is because there can be a lot of different ways to have cards balanced, just kind of the nature of the cube, because the games also play very differently from a normal game of like 1v1 constructed magic. So you have 12 cards. You probably noticed there weren't any lands in those cards that I named. So as the game starts, each player has 3 everywhere lands in play. They tap for 1 mana of any color. Everywhere is a reference to the token that Overlord of the Hauntwoods generates from Duskmourn. And so each player starts off with 3 of those in play, and players have a 4-card hand to start. During their upkeep, except for the first turn, they discard their hand and then they draw 4 cards. And then if they try to draw from an empty library, they instead shuffle their graveyard and it becomes their library. For anyone who's familiar with Slay the Spire, that probably sounds a lot more familiar to you just because the 3 lands you have in play kind of represent the energy that you have. And then the way that you draw cards and play at your turns is very reminiscent of Slay the Spire as well.
Yeah, so I think it's super cool that you have a creature theme in there. Like you said, you start with 3 copies of Mons Goblin Raider, Merfolk of the Pearl Trident, Willow Elf, and really to somebody who doesn't understand the cube might just say, oh, those are just random 1/1 creatures. Why does it matter what color they are, what creature type? But for example, I had a really unique deck when we drafted this cube before that I had very early on an emblem that said, replace all of the starting creatures in your deck with Mons Goblin Raiders. And I saw that and I said, wow, that's super cool. Now I can go all in on goblins. And it just creates these really unique moments and decks in the cube that wouldn't exist otherwise.
Yeah, and I think you went second in our event too, so it definitely worked out for you. I'm glad that the support was there to do that because it definitely was intentional to allow just shooting a bunch of goblins at your opponent's face to be a viable strategy.
Yes, definitely. And like you said, the gameplay in this cube is really unique. You really can never have a hand for more than one turn because, like you said, you discard your hand on your upkeep and draw 4 cards. So it's really a cube where you're kind of dumping your hand a lot. And also, you're discarding your hand all the time. You're filling up your graveyard. And then there's also the mechanic of it shuffling your graveyard into your library. I think it's really interesting when you change the rules of Magic and you make updates to the actual gameplay and how that affects the cube design and different cards you might include in the cube.
Yeah, there's a bunch of really neat cards that I kind of got to read through when picking out cards for this. And I mean, these are cards that you might see in constructed formats anyway, but they're cards that you have to evaluate significantly differently in this environment. So I guess just as an example, one card that I'll pick out that I'm looking in the list right now, Kitchen Imp, which is a 4 mana 2/2 flying haste, and it has madness for a black. So normally, you'd have to build your deck heavily around to support playing a creature like that in your deck. There are decks, I think, in the past that have done that, like in Pauper or something like that. But in this cube, it's just as simple as you have to wait having it in your hand for a turn, then you get to discard it, and then you just have a 1 mana 2/2 haste. So, cards like that, they really change how you evaluate the cards that you are deciding to put into your deck.
Absolutely. And looking at some other cards that are really affected by the rules change in this cube, like a card that I don't think I've ever seen anyone play in their cube, but Wayward Guide Beast, which is 1 red for a 2/2 trample haste. When it deals combat damage to a player, return a land you control to your hand. Because you only have 3 lands in play and you start with them, and there's really no other lands in the cube except for a few. This is almost like a ramp piece because you tap your 3 lands and then you deal combat damage, and then you can replay that same land and use it to cast other spells. I just love these different types of cards that really get so totally recontextualized.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun kind of like digging out different cards from Scryfall, just putting in random prompts. One of the ones that I did kind of most recently actually was just looking up every card that has protection from red. And that's because the starting removal spells are all red removal. So if you have a creature that's protection from red, your opponent has to pretty actively decide to draft a non-red removal spell to be able to deal with it. Otherwise, just evades all of that. And so one example is Soltari Priest, which is a 2 mana 2/1 with Shadow and protection from red. It's a card that I don't think has probably seen play since the extended block whenever this card came out originally, which I don't know at the top of my head. But it's a lot better here because it's a 2 mana 2/1 unblockable that pretty much has Shroud, unless your opponent has a card that can deal with it. Other cards that I thought were really funny to include in here were the storage lands, which I don't think you played with in our iteration when we first did it. But the storage lands, they're the only lands that you have access to drafting here. So they're obviously normally really terrible, but they become a lot better when they're the only land that you have the option to try and put into play. So
Yes, absolutely. And another thing that's really interesting too is it's really hard to like permanently deal with something in this cube because your graveyard shuffles back in. So that's a really interesting part of the gameplay that it's almost like every deck has a value engine built into it because you know that you're going to keep shuffling your graveyard back in. You're never going to really truly run out of gas. Like that also affects how you draft your deck, which we'll get more into the drafting process. But for example, if your deck is all 1/1s at the beginning, the first round, and just like some removal spells, it's very hard to win the game at that point because it's just a bunch of 1/1s that keep getting reshuffled in. But just one card can make such a huge difference. Like I had Arabella, Abandoned Doll, and a way to give it haste. That was some of the very earliest cards that I drafted. And Arabella says, whenever it attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent and you gain X, or X number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. So basically, my game plan was to get out a bunch of 1/1s early game and then draw Arabella eventually, play it, give it haste, attack. And then when it died, it would get shuffled back in. So it just really creates these interesting gameplay moments and strategies that wouldn't be in normal Magic.
that's kind of my whole goal with this too, is just to either play with cards that you're used to playing or even play cards that you've never resolved in your life. And one of the things that I really tried to do to emphasize that was to not make it possible to exile your opponent's stuff. So one thing is there's no Oblivion Ring effects, there's no like Swords to Plowshares. I just think if your opponent has a really cool win condition, that's kind of like the entire reason that they built their deck, and you just have the ability to get rid of it with one card, probably a pretty terrible feeling. So there's ways to exile your own cards, And in fact, that's kind of another mechanic that I think is kind of interesting here, just because you have a bunch of 1 mana 1/1s in your deck. And chances are most people are not going to be using all 9 1 mana 1/1s to great effect in their deck. So if you have the ability to exile them, whether it's exiling them from your hand or it's exiling them to delve spells or just any other effects like that, getting them out of your deck because you're just going to reshuffle your graveyard into your deck and then keep drawing through cards anyway. You want to see those cards less and less so that you can play, your more efficient, powerful cards.
Yeah, exactly. That's something that we should also mention. Your deck size keeps growing. So it's not like you replace these 1/1s that don't do very much as the game goes on. You still have to have these cards in your deck. So while you're moving through your deck really quickly, you could still just draw 4 1/1s. So having ways to make those more powerful, whether it be kindred themes to make all goblins more powerful, or really cool, like you said, making them usable in other ways, like sack outlets to be able to get extra value with cards like Warren and Soul Trader to get treasures, or subtlety that you can exile a blue card from your hand is really cool because then if you exile a blue card from your hand, you don't have to draw that 1 mana 1/1 again. It's almost like deck thinning in a weird way.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good time now to mention too how the drafting process works.
Yes.
So at the start of the event, and this is kind of something that we discovered in like very early playtesting, but at the start of the event, you draft one of the emblems that we had mentioned. For reference, there's like 4 different rounds of emblems that kind of indicate how crazy of an effect they will have on the game and on your deck. So the starting emblems are typically more light, and as you go on, they get more and more powerful as the event goes on. So you draft your first emblem before the round starts, and then another one after every other round. So before the start of the third round, before the start of the fifth round, and before the start of the seventh round. And then for doing the cards, drafting a card in this context means you look at the top 4 cards of the cube and you choose one of them to put into your deck. So before every round, you draft 2 cards. Before we had done this, doing the drafting as the event starts, we were just playing the starting decks and the starting emblems, and the games were very, very long, as you can probably imagine, where you're just having walls of 1/1s sitting against each other. So having the little bit of extra cards just kind of added enough to make the games a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, I think that the drafting process is really unique because, like we mentioned, you're not sitting with 8 players and drafting a deck. So you get these 4 cards, you pick one, put in your deck, you get another 4 cards, put in your deck. But what I found is that these emblems kind of give you that interesting push to not just take the best card and put in your deck. It kind of gives you signals like you would in a draft or a direction based off what you see. For example, I saw the goblin emblem to make all my guys goblins. If I had not seen that emblem to replace all my 1/1s with goblins, there's no way I would have gone a goblin kindred deck. The emblems, I think, really add a lot to making the gameplay feel unique draft after draft and make you want to come back to it.
For sure. As you say, this is not a drafting experience you do with a table of 8 people. You're not really fighting for cards with other people. You're kind of fighting with yourself to make your best possible deck. At that point, the only way to really kind of push you in a direction is kind of like what you were saying, where you really need to evaluate the emblems that you're given the choice of and say, okay, given this, what's going to be the best card to add into my deck? And there's going to be a lot of different directions that the emblems give you. So giving 9 goblins into your deck will make you want to be more aggro and push you obviously towards playing goblins. There's one emblem basically just puts Fires of Invention into play at the start of the game.
Wow.
So you'd be building a very different deck under those circumstances.
Yeah, give us some examples of some of the emblems that are some of the weaker ones and then go up power level.
Sure, yeah. So we already have the one that you had mentioned that you had drafted. So it not only gives you the option to turn all of your creatures into goblins, but you could also choose to turn your creatures into merfolk or turn your creatures into elves as well.
Yes.
And so the reason why that's relevant is because the emblem drafting process happens simultaneously with the card drafting process. So if in your 2, I guess we can say packs of 4 that you're drafting from, if you have one really good merfolk in each of those 2 packs, you'd want to move towards merfolk instead. So I think maybe you had seen good goblins into your packs, and that's what made you make that decision. Another one is your life total is 4 greater than your normal starting life total. So that's another thing I probably should have mentioned earlier on too. At the start of the first round, all players have a life total of 10. And then after every round, every player's starting life total increases by one. So, you go from 10 to 11, 12, etc. But this one just says no matter what, it's four greater than it would be otherwise. And in fact, this is kind of like a cycle. Every single like round of emblems that you draft, there's an example where your starting life total increases. It's four for like the early time, and then it goes to eight, and then 12, and then 16. But just kind of continuing through some of these, there's one emblem that you can start off with that says at the start of your first upkeep, draw two cards. So I called that one divination. But actually, for those who play Slay the Spire, you might be familiar. There's actually a relic inside the Spire that says at the start of your first turn, you draw two cards. So I actually even took a little bit of inspiration at times for how some of these emblems work on the game too.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's something I wanted to ask you more about. How did you design these emblems? Were they very much inspired by the emblems or relics in Slay the Spire, or did you design them because you wanted to draft players in specific directions and create certain archetypes?
Kind of a mix of a lot of things. I did want to push certain themes that I thought were fun. One thing that I did a few times was I'm kind of a sucker for these like draft gimmicks. So one of the starting relics is you add Renowned Weaponsmith, Heart Piercer Bow, and Vial of Dragonfire to your deck. Uh, you probably don't know what those are, but if you think that they did in the original Tarkir block, where the Cons of Tarkir had, I think it had Heart Piercer Bow, and then the middle set had Renowned Weaponsmith, and then the last set had Vial of Dragonfire. And Renowned Weaponsmith references the other two cards. It can like basically, does it search? I don't even remember what it does at this point. Does it
Yeah, it
search with
tutors
them?
them up.
Yeah, I can't even remember what they do. But I had a couple examples of draft gimmicks like that. So another one was like you put Bubbling Cauldron and Festering Newt into your deck. So I'm not sure if you know that one.
I remember
But these
those. I
are
had them when I was a kid.
sure.
Do you
But
have the
those
witch that gets them?
I don't have the witch that gets them because that thing is 5 mana and it's too tough to get to 5 mana in this
Yeah,
cube.
that's
It's
true.
possible, but I don't think you really want to spend 5 mana on the witch that gets them. But yeah, I wanted to do these things because you kind of can't really put these into a normal cube, at least a cube of like a power level I think that most people are looking to play. Cubes I think sometimes will include packages like, it'll include Asmo plus the Underworld Cookbook as packages that you have to draft. But those things are a little bit stronger than, again, Renowned Weaponsmith, which I couldn't even remember what it did, even though it's in my cube, with Violet Dragonfire and Heartpiercer Bow. So yeah.
Yeah, you also include some conspiracies in here, which I think is pretty cool. And like Brago's favor, you can reduce a cost by one. And also Muzio's preparation, which is hilarious, which says each creature controlled with the chosen name enters with a 1/1 counter on it. So if you replace them all with Mons Goblin Raiders, then they're all 2/2s. That's pretty good.
Somebody actually did that the other day when we were playing the cube. They made all of their Willow Elves. They got Muzio's preparations and they got immediate action. So all of their Willow Elves just became Goblin Guides, just 2/2s with haste, which was pretty funny to see and kind of unbeatable against certain people. So
Yes. And tell me about how you came up with this draft design that you get two packs of four and you take one from each of them.
yeah, in Slay the Spire, after you complete an encounter against an enemy, you got a card reward, which is you see three random cards that correspond to your character. You can put one of them into your deck. You can also choose to skip. I guess that's one thing that's relevant. You can also choose to skip in this draft process if you don't like any of the cards that you see. I wanted to make that four just because I didn't think that three was enough to see. And then I also wanted to make it two different packs because I think that having more cards in your deck is just more fun than having less cards in your deck.
Yeah, I thought that it made a lot of sense. I liked the process of being able to look at the two piles of four at the same time and say which ones do I want. And it is very relevant to skip because if you open up a pack with nothing good in it for your deck, it's not like you can just put it in your sideboard. You have to put it in your deck.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. I think one thing we probably should mention too, just shifting gears a little bit, is how you win or lose. So I mentioned that you got second place. Because you're drafting cards after every game, it's not like a typical, best of three. I go against one person and then we face off in 3 rounds. You can just randomly face any player in any given round. But how it works is when you lose a game, you get poison counters equal to the number of emblems that you have. So it starts off with one, then goes to two, eventually up to four. And then once you have 10 poison counters, you just lose the draft. Typically, we've just allowed people to continue playing after that's happened, just for fun purposes.
They're like the
But
dead player in Hearthstone, the computer that keeps going.
yeah, it's like the ghost from Battlegrounds, exactly. And then, whoever ends up not having 10 poison counters at the end ends up just winning the whole draft, which for, a more casual cube like that just kind of means bragging rights, I guess. We weren't playing this for prize money.
Yeah, I think that it really creates some interesting deck building theory and strategy. Like my deck that I built really was able to just kind of get a bunch of 1/1s and pump them up quick and get some poison in the early rounds because I was able to just kill people with Arabella and deal a lot of damage or pump them up with Patchwork Banner to make all my goblins huge. But in the later rounds, people were able to draft some really powerful like combos or more powerful synergies than just like a bunch of 1/1s could deal with. I tried to get a lot of poison in the earlier rounds when people were kind of setting up. And then later on, I didn't really have as much of a game plan, but that early poison damage did take an effect.
Yeah, one thing that I've really wanted to try and see that I haven't been able to see yet is someone to try and do an infinite in here too, kind of mentioning game plans. I think the most obvious thing to do right now is either to aggro your opponents out or to get some sort of card that just gives you continuous value every turn. Whether that's like an artifact or enchantment, just because the artifact enchantment hate's a little bit tougher in here. It's a little bit harder to get, that is. But one thing that I've really wanted to see that I just haven't been able to manage to crack through yet is with finding an infinite. I intentionally didn't include any like two card I win sort of things, like, no Splinter Twin, for instance, but like really like weird ways to kind of win using the mechanics of the cube. I guess the biggest example of the card that I kind of want to highlight with this is Glimpse of Nature. When you cast a creature spell this turn, draw a card for 1 green. I've really wanted to see somebody try and create some loop where they can just keep casting creature spells and drawing from an empty library and then shuffling through and then just continuing to draw. Because there is ways to do it. I just think that right now it's probably too hard to still. But I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, if you just only get the 1/1s, deny every round, and then you eventually play Glimpse of Nature plus Warren Soul Trader and a Blood Artist, and you just get them. That would be
Yeah,
sweet.
I would love to see somebody do that, but Glimpse of Nature I think is too hard of a card to draft unless you're in an insane thing like that.
And have you ever considered making different rule changes to the cube or affecting how the rules go? Like one thing I remember talking with you about early on was what if you had a set deck size and you were able to change the cards in your deck? Kind of like how Ryan Sachs's Auto Battler cube is, where you have 15 cards and you can only ever have 15, and as the draft goes on, you replace those cards. Have you considered doing any types of different rules in the cube?
One thing that I have thought about trying to do was instead of having the starting deck, kind of having players do like a traditional draft process beforehand with cards from the cube, and then that's your starting deck. I feel like it would be really, really unbalanced to do that. Like, oh, I never saw a removal spell, so my deck is kind of terrible. Or, I have no good creatures, like no good cheap creatures, and like my curve's way too high, so I'm kind of screwed in that regard. But I think it'd be interesting to see that because it might make it easier to do some of those more like really strange interactions. Just because one of the things is since you're eventually going to die, you're incentivized to try and win continuously over time as opposed to like just building up to some end goal like you would be in a draft. You're not really going for an all or nothing strategy because if you never get the all, you're just going to die like way too quickly. So I think that might be able to kind of allow for some more things like that, but it also might be too hard to balance that.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And you're totally right. Like when I was playing the cube, I really felt like, oh, I have all these 1/1s and I keep losing every round, so I need to like actually take removal or ways to actually do something in these games before I die to poison.
Yeah, definitely. The thing that's kind of funny too is like because there's such a limited number of players, we've only done this so far with 4 people at a time. You know that somebody has a certain card, and like I'm going to face this person again. So if I know that I can't beat this card, I need to draft something like really soon that I know can beat that card because otherwise I'm just going to get beaten by them again.
That's true because you could just randomize into the same person.
I think the method that I've been doing right now, and I'm glad you mentioned the auto battler cube because I definitely used some of the rules ideas from there as inspiration. For selecting players, what we've been doing is if you roll a 1 or a 20, you face off against the same opponent, and then otherwise an odds corresponds to one player and evens corresponds to like the fourth player. If we were to do an 8-person pod, I think the easiest way to do it would just be to have 2 pods of 4 rather than have one giant mess because you don't have to move around nearly as much. But we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah. And now that we've talked a lot about some of the rules changes to the cube, and hopefully we haven't overwhelmed the listeners. I know there's a lot that we've talked about. I want to get into some of the more kind of normal cube design perspective ideas. Like, did you design the cube with archetypes in mind, or more smaller packages of synergies that play with the themes of the cube, or synergize with, example, the discard of your hand, or draw four every turn? Tell me about that.
I would say it's definitely more like sweeping archetypes that I wanted to have, just because with smaller card packages and with the fact that it's a 360 cube, you're looking at 4 cards at a time. I thought that like 2 card packages would just be too hard to draft. So I put in some like very general things like life gain or sacrifice themes or discard. I mean, discard's not really that hard to build around because you're already doing it, but like things that synergize when you do discard cards, I guess. So things like, Flame Blade Adept, for instance, or the different kindred groups. So again, like merfolk or goblins or elves. So definitely thought more so in terms of like wide sweeping archetypes. Another one being just like generally having artifact synergies. I thought was going to be easier to do just because there's already so much. It's kind of like, decision overload already since you're not going to be used to playing this most likely unless you've already played it a lot, which I would say no one has because I've only played this 4 or 5 times at this point myself. But wanted to make the decisions a little bit more easier for the players in that regard.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's so many rules and things you have to explain to people on the cube, make it a little bit easier to draft and some of the themes be more obvious. So people, when they're looking at this 4 card pack and a second 4 card pack and they have all these random 1/1s in their deck and they're like, what do I do? Don't overwhelm the players already than they are.
For sure. Yeah. Honestly, I have been kind of afraid of like, oh gosh, like, is this just like strange Micah weirdness thing that I made one night and like, no one is going to enjoy this? But I feel like everyone that I've tested this with, they pretty quickly got the concept within the first game. It's like, oh yeah, I understand what's going on. Like, this is fine. And the decks have usually been pretty on par with one another in terms of the games have felt competitive and like there's been actual back and forth. One thing that I have had fear is like if your deck is just strictly better than your opponent's deck, like you're just gonna win too much. But that actually hasn't happened as much as I thought it would, I guess.
That's great. And another question that I have for you is, so what has been the feedback from players who are really big into Slay the Spire? Are players of Slay the Spire finding this cube to be resonant and actually reminiscent of Slay the Spire or roguelikes?
It's funny that you asked that because I have not gathered any feedback from that. I know that some people who've played this have definitely played a lot of Slay the Spire in the past, but I haven't really gotten feedback from people as if to the experience feels like that. So I guess maybe I could only really talk from my own experience. And I guess what I would say is to some extent, I do feel like there are similarities. One thing that happens a lot in Slay the Spire is instead of drawing 4 cards per turn, you draw 5 cards per turn in that game. And one of the things with that is because you only have 3 energy or mana, however you want to call it, and typically your cards are going to cost more than one. You're obviously not going to be able to play your entire hand. So you have to dump a lot of cards. And with that, you're typically dumping your starting cards. And I guess that's sort of a thing that I felt a lot in here because it's like, oh, I have a 3 mana card that I drafted actively and really want to play. And then my hand, other than that, is 3 1 mana 1/1s that I don't care about. And from like an outsider perspective, I guess one thing that I did here was like, wow, that cube looks really unbalanced because they have 3 terrible creatures in their hand, and then they have one really good card in their hand. And it's like that's kind of the point, because that's kind of how Slay the Spire works too. It's like you're trying to build out of having a bad deck into having a good deck. That's kind of like the entire intention. So I guess from that perspective, I have felt that.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. I'd be very interested to hear in the future if we talk about this cube again, what other Slay the Spires players think.
For sure. I should definitely be asking that more. I've more so been trying to center the feedback around which cards just felt too awful to play against. Like, are there cards that just really ruined your experience or just warped the game too much?
Tell
Or
me
are there
about some of
cards,
those. Like, what cards were too good?
some cards that I removed from the first iteration of this were all of the Soul Warden effects. So I removed Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant, Essence Warden. Basically, any creature that gains life when a creature enters the battlefield, regardless of which player's battlefield it entered under. So I still have Hinterland Sanctifier, which is a new card from Jumpstart, which only triggers on your own creatures. But cards that just gain you life whenever a creature enters from either player's side were just really, really annoying to get past. Even though like they die to literally every removal spell in the cube, sometimes you don't draw them, or sometimes you have like a bigger threat that you need to deal with. And when that happens, and then you're playing a game where you're starting at like 10 or 11, 12 life, and then your opponent's at 21, it can just feel like I can't ever beat them. And even if I can kind of like deal damage at the same rate as them, they're just like very much going to outvalue at me. And then, just one card being able to do that was too much. So that was something that I removed from like the first iteration. The card that I removed the last time we played this was Abzan Ascendancy. So I will definitely be pulling the Scryfall up on that one just because I know a lot of people might not have played that one before. But it's white, black, green for an enchantment. And when it enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And then when a non-token creature you control dies, you create a 1/1 spirit with flying. So I had this card in my deck. I actually drafted it before the draft started, so it was in my starting deck, essentially. In the first game, it just completely won me the game without really asking any questions. My opponent tries to clear my creatures, and I instead say, no, I have a 1/1 flyer, and it's just like, okay, I lose. And even later on, as the cube went on, I just kept drafting more like tokeny support cards or like getting more low curve creatures that I could use to fill the board with, or like benefit having a wide board, just made the card way too good. So I took that one out.
Abzan Ascendancy brings me back. That's like from one of the first hits I ever played, and I thought that card was awesome.
I mean, I think the card's awesome too. You know me, I love sacrifice stuff. So it kind of tore my heart to have to part with that one, but it is what it is.
Oh, that's kind of your kind of card for sure.
Yeah.
And tell me about some of your favorite decks that you've seen in the most recent drafts.
So yeah, one of the things that I think I mentioned earlier was the Fires of Invention emblem. So the way that that specifically works, just that we're here, is not only do you have the Fires of Invention effect, but it also gives you an additional land as the game starts. That's like a way to play 4 mana cards into your deck much more effectively. Pearson played that. I think he was on for the mono blue cube, right?
Yeah,
Listeners might know Pearson, remember him. But he had drafted a Fires of Invention deck and just put in a bunch of like really big idiots. I mean, I can tell having played Q with him that that's kind of style that he plays decks, but it worked out really well for him. He built a really, really cool deck where he just put in a bunch of big dudes. This was after I added in the storage lands and he drafted a few. And I think he had like 6 lands in play
wow.
at times and was able to like, even without Fires of Invention, you could add like 10 mana at a time. So like whenever he got there, his deck was just completely untouchable because he was going way over the top of what anyone else could possibly do to him. So that was a really cool deck. Definitely not the sort of thing that I typically go for just because you know me, I go for the the small creatures that die and do something good.
And there's a lot of that in here.
There's a lot of that in here. And I mean, what that we're on the topic, I really liked your Goblin deck too. I had just added in Patchwork Banner last minute. I think when I first was thinking about this, Bloomborough was still somewhat new, so I don't even know that that was a card. I think I saw it at IRL, and I'm like, oh, that seems really strong.
That
That
was
seems
one of
like
the
it'd be
best cards in my deck,
work
100%.
well. Yeah, and I think it's great. So I'm glad that you had a good time with that one as well.
Yes. And I'm sure that Aristocrats is good in this cube.
I tried to intentionally tone it back. I mean, I guess I do have Blood Artist and Marionette Apprentice in here, but I think Goblin Bombardment is definitely way too good for this environment. So there's no way that I'm putting that in here.
Bombardment would be crazy. You could just sack your guys to kill the opponent's 1/1s too.
Or just kill them. Yeah. If they, whenever they try and kill any of your stuff, I think that's too good. I'm definitely not putting that in here.
Yeah, player removal is good creature removal.
Yes.
And Micah, it's been awesome having you on the show again. Anything you want to say to the listeners before we wrap up?
I guess I would just say I'm a big proponent of these roguelike deck builder games. We talked a lot about Slay the Spire on this episode today, but there's a lot of tabletop games that Slay the Spire was based off of, or I'm not sure, what the direct inspiration was. I'm not going to try and pretend that I know the creators of the game or anything like that. But I know that there's a lot of games that are tabletop games that came before that are also really fun. So if you've really stuck to the past to playing the single player video games that are roguelike deck builders, I'd encourage trying to get together a group of your friends who are similar fans and try and find some of the good tabletop options too. So some of the ones that I've played that I've really enjoyed are Dominion, Star Realms, Hero Realms. So games like that, I would highly recommend.
My favorite roguelike is Balatro.
Fair enough. I have way too many hours in that game myself, so I get it.
I need to revisit it again. I've only done a few decks. I need to get back into
Well,
it.
if you ever need any tips, I've played the game for like 300 hours at this point. Geez. So,
Yes, everyone reach out to Micah on Discord, or I don't think you have social media much. So on Discord, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
yeah, you could probably find me on Discord. I guess it's just Will Asian, originally known as Will Asian, hashtag 2914.
Yeah. If you want to talk about Balatro, reach out to Micah. Definitely. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please like, subscribe, follow. Have a good day.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ian. Have a good day, everybody.